All right, testing, testing. All right, well, hello everybody. Who's excited for a conversation on applied statistics? Woo, all right, that's what I was hoping for. So I'm Barron. I lead our FBN's data science and analytics team based out of San Francisco, originally from New Hampshire, and I'm really excited to be here today. If you'll forgive me, I prepared some formal notes to kick off the session today. As farmers, you know that the success of your business depends on a variety of factors, including the productivity of your land, the efficiency of your operation, and market conditions. Today, I'm going to talk about how data science can help you optimize your farming operation and maximize your profitability. Now, data science is a field that uses advanced analytics and computational techniques to extract insights and knowledge from large and diverse data sets. In the context of agriculture, data science can be applied to various aspects of the food production process, from crop and soil management to pest control and irrigation. In this presentation, I will introduce you to some of the key concepts and tools of data science and show you how they can be applied to specific challenges of agriculture. I will also discuss some of the opportunities and challenges of using data science in this field and how it can help you make better informed decisions and increase the profitability of your farming operations. Now, I promise that'll be the only time I read from a script. But I also have a confession to make. I didn't write that, and neither did our marketing team or any of our PR organization. Next slide, please. I guess I have the clicker here. That was written about 3 days ago in 90 seconds by GPT-3 chat, an AI chatbot built off of a large language model. So this is an example of applied data science in action. And I wanted to take you through a couple of steps, because this is really a groundbreaking moment in the field of kind of how I created this introduction to data science in the presentation. So very technical coding here. I had to type in, can you write an introduction to a presentation on data science and agriculture? And about 30 seconds later, this is what it spit out. But there's a problem here. The second paragraph, or third paragraph, it says, as you may know, agriculture is a critical sector. Well, if you're here at Farmer2Farmer, you already know that. So I had to re-prompt the thing, the bot, and I said, all right, note, the audience is farmers, so they already know how critical agriculture sector is. And all right, 15 seconds later, it rewrote it and said, sure, in that case, the introduction could be adjusted to focus more on the specific benefits of data science and agriculture. And so now you can see here the second paragraph says, as farmers, you're well aware. So it was able to further edit it. But this is very focused on sustainability. And while we're big proponents of sustainability here at FBN, we prefer to think about it through the lens of profitability. So I gave it another nudge, and I said, please focus less on the sustainability and more on the profitability of the farm. I didn't say please, I probably should have. We're trying to train our kids to say please when they ask Alexa to do something, but anyway, focus less on the sustainability, more on the profitability, and here it goes, kicked out the introduction that I just read you all. So really interesting. I think we're going to see some amazing things coming out of OpenAI. This is the company that created this. And hopefully today you get a sense of the types of tools that data science brings to the table in developing kind of the next generation of some exciting technology like this GPT chatbot. So thanks for sticking with me with my little farce right there. So what is data science? This is actually pretty similar to what the chatbot spit out, but is kind of the definition I like to think about. And it's really a combination of three different disciplines. Computer science blended with statistics and domain expertise, and that can be whatever domain that we happen to be focused on today. It's agriculture. And it's a field that uses applied statistics to find useful insights from large, complex, and diverse data sets. Got to remember to keep my clicker on me here. So the first section, we're going to talk about each of those three circles in turn. The first one's on statistics, and subtitled Helping Humans Make Better Decisions. And I'm borrowing this heavily from Matt Meisner, my boss, who's historically given this presentation here at Farmer to Farmer. And the basic idea here is that we're emotional biological beings, and we're not always the best rational actors. And I think both Jocko this morning and Alex last night talked a lot about this and how emotion and fear and preferences and biases and experience kind of get in the way of our decision making sometimes. And data can often help us act in a more rational fashion. And so here's some examples. 57% of Americans think genetically modified crops are unsafe to eat. But the science all points to saying that they're just as safe as a conventionally grown crop. And it goes so far as that then this perception then drives business. It drives marketing. You've got the GMO-free label, for example. And I recently saw an example of GMO-free rock salt, Himalayan pink rock salt in the supermarket. So, and I know it's truth in advertising. There's absolutely no GMO in that salt, I'm sure. And this is kind of what is sometimes called the Lake Wobegon effect. 73% of Americans say they're better than the average driver, and that's just mathematically impossible. Garrison Keillor, Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. There's a perception of being above average that we tend to cling to, but that just can't be the case. And this was a report that came out recently that I thought was hilarious. 7% of American men think they could beat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat. And 6% of women, impressively, and maybe Farm Fit Mama might have a good shot at it, but it's it's a great example of other biases that are present in humans, and particularly when they self-report on surveys, I might add. And they did a follow-up of this study in the UK, and it was really interesting to see much more rational approach. A much smaller percentage of people from the UK thought they could beat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat. But curiously, actually, more people over in the UK thought they could beat a rat than in the United States. Maybe they have more experience. I don't know. And then this, it's not just about the kind of trivial surveys. It's about really important things like your 401k, your retirement. And 76% of actively managed funds underperform the S&P 500. I'm sure the Sage of Omaha could have told us that. But supposedly the best and the brightest are going to manage hedge funds and investment companies, and they charge management fees to do so. But 76% of the time, you're better off just trusting the average, putting in a broad index fund, and that'll outperform any kind of managed fund. It's really hard to beat that average. Other really big, important decisions that are made, influenced by our biology, our moods, our emotions. This is some data from parole board rulings by time of day. This is really scary, right? This is the people kind of responsible for determining whether or not somebody's going to be able to, get out on parole, get out of jail a little bit early. And what we're seeing here is that close to 80% of cases heard that day in the morning are favorably decided. And that percentage drops pretty steadily over the course of the morning. And it looks like hunger set in. And so meal break, blood sugar levels maybe are back up, and the next set of cases heard, much more favorable rulings again, and that starts to decline over time. People get tired, we're biological, our blood sugar goes down. So I certainly, if I were a prisoner seeking parole, would want to be first in line, if at all possible. And there's a very technical statistical term for this, and it's called the hanger bias. So that kind of brings me to wisdom of the crowd, and a lot of the tools and analytics that FBN provides its members are really fundamentally based on this concept of the wisdom of the crowd. And I have to remind myself that there are livestock folks in here because the original story of the wisdom of the crowd was actually comes from a agricultural fair in the UK in the early 1900s. And there was a contest to guess the weight of a live ox. And at the end of the day, they were going to butcher the ox, and whoever got the closest to the guess would get a quarter section or so. And of course, I've got a heifer up here, so it's maybe not the best picture for an audience with some folks that raise livestock. But anyway, this kind of jack of all trades, Victorian times, Sir Dalton, was at this fair, and he thought it was really interesting, this contest. And there's over 750 responses. And so he decided he was going to take all those responses and average them out and see how it fared against the actual weight of the animal. And the actual weight was just under 1,200 pounds. And the average of the crowd, of those 780 people that guessed, was 1197, not brought to you by Pioneer. And so this was kind of the concept of wisdom of the crowd was born out of this experience that this Victorian mathematician and jack of all trades had. And we're going to test it in this site. What people tell me is an old FBN tradition, but does sound a little bit humiliating. But I'm going to ask you right now, live, to guess how much I weigh. So please take out your phones, take a picture of the QR code, and if that doesn't work, there's a URL below it. And while you do this, you should get a little poll. You can enter in how much you think I weigh. And over the course of the rest of the presentation, we actually have one of our data scientists in the back, Jay, is going to be crunching the numbers, and we're going to see how wise this crowd is. And it's kind of an unfair time of year. We're just coming off of Thanksgiving, got a holiday fair, all the conference food. So, keep that in mind as you consider your guesses. How tall am I? I'm 6 feet. So, but I've already biased the data here because I provided asymmetric information to the different participants because we had the technology team guess this morning. So another way bias can creep into data. And as you're doing this, talking a little bit more about the wisdom of the crowd. Charles this morning was talking about our library of seed yield and price information. And I think it's over 100,000 entries on seed performance, which is which we believe is the largest library of hybrid and varietal performance anywhere in the world. And that's all data that was contributed by the network and packaged into value that we try to provide back to the network. And it's fundamentally based on this concept of the wisdom of the crowds. You might get a small plot trial or a couple strip trials might not give you the most accurate results, but if you're looking at data from across hundreds of thousands of acres of a particular hybrid, you can be pretty confident in the range of results you're seeing. All right, so I'm going to move on now. And so we just talked about statistics, the first in the triad of the fields that make up data science. Now we're going to talk about number 2, which is computer science. And big data. And so first of all, what is meant by big data? And I wanted to put into perspective how big is big in the big data. And consider this. Approximately 99% of humanity's data has been produced in the last 5 years. And I suspect that this number will continue to be true in each of the next 5 or even 10 years as the rate at which we're generating data as a species continues to accelerate. So what does that mean? How much is that? How do we put that into context? Well, this is going to make it easy to interpret, right? 2.5 quintillion bytes per day. That's a number everybody's comfortable with? No, of course not. It's a lot of zeros, but what does that actually mean? And so I was thinking about, all right, what's a nice unit of data? And 3.5-inch floppy disk. We can all relate to that, right? At least some of the older ones of us here. And so if you take 3.5-inch floppy disks, which are conveniently 3.5 inches, and you laid them end to end from Omaha, you would reach all the way to our sun, filling up just one day's worth of data production on Earth. That's a lot of data. And where does it all come from? So, let's think about 10 seconds on a given day on planet Earth. We have 1 million Google searches that take place in those 10 seconds. 25,000 photos were posted on Facebook. Over 200,000 hours of phone calls took place in those 10 seconds. 83 hours of content uploaded to YouTube. 83 million emails were sent. And I think I got like a percentage of them this morning looking at my inbox. 233 satellite pictures were taken of the planet. 33 million gigabytes created, goes on and on. But that is just mind-boggling. I can't even begin to get my mind around what that all means. But we're not here to talk about social media or big tech. We're here to talk about agriculture. So where did kind of big data come from in agriculture? And so I was thinking about this season, about 88 million acres of beans planted, 90 million acres of corn, and kind of got some low seeding rates for beans, but bear with me here. I wanted to be conservative in the estimate. And so that represents about 13.7 trillion seeds planted in American soil this year, just across corns and beans. That's a lot of plants. And if we think about harvest activity, harvest season, let's assume it takes about 90 days. And I'm sure some of you spend longer hours in the combine, but on average 12 hours a day. That works out to about 13 billion plants harvested every hour and 200 million plants harvested every minute. And these are just huge numbers. And it's sometimes helpful to bring them back to something like a plant that we can easily count. And it's not just one plant, right? For every plant, as data scientists in agriculture, we think about where was that planted? What was the time of day? What was the date it was planted? What kind of tractor was pulling the planter? What kind of row units did it have? How fast was it going? How hard was the engine working? This is all data being generated with every seed that's going in the ground. What was the hybrid? What was the RM? What was the trait package? What were the other marketing attributes? How much did that bag cost? Did it have a treatment? What was it? And then what about the soil that it was laid into? What was the organic matter, the pH, the CEC, the elevation? What was the temperature at planting? How many GDUs went by over the course of the season? Weather, combine data, yield, moisture, combine model, combine speed, et cetera, et cetera. And so for every one of those 13 trillion plants, we also can cross-reference it with many of these data points. And so you see how quickly and how exponentially the quantity of data that we have to work with increases, and it's daunting. So how do we possibly work with all of that data? And so I'm going to do a little bit of a history of data storage and data compute. And a comforting image of a Casio solar-powered calculator. So where it all started, my daughter's 5.5, and she's really good at counting on her fingers, and she does great when it's in single digits. And not a coincidence that the word digit it refers to both numbers and fingers. This was our first calculator. Our first data storage mechanism was our hands, and it's great for small numbers. But once my daughter gets to like 12, 14, the hands are no longer useful. And so I imagine our ancient ancestors had a similar problem. And we have some evidence of how we started to get more sophisticated and storing and working with data. And this is a picture of the Ishango bone, which was a archaeological relic found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. and it's radiocarbon dated to about 22,000 years ago. And it has these geometric lines scraped into it, and the general consensus, though there's some disagreement, is that these were tally marks, similar to what a prisoner or castaway might carve into a rock in their lonely cell or island. Now, just to be very clear, it's also possible that this was just some things carved into a tool to get better grip. But I love the idea that this could be one of the first examples of data capture and data storage. And you can imagine, what did our ancient relatives need to track? They probably looked at where the game was moving, what kind of food they were, had left in their camp storage. So very plausibly, some type of food-related data here. And we'll fast forward 10,000 years or so to Sumerian language and some of the first written language on Earth in cuneiform. And this particular tablet from 3400 BC actually happens to contain a grain bill and a recipe for barley wine or barley beer. So I love that one of the earliest forms of human writing happens to be a grain bill for some beer. And again, agriculture and data science and information storage have a very, very deep historical connection. And coincidentally, the tool that they used to create the characters in the cuneiform was a reed. And this is probably an image familiar to a lot of you. It's a Roman abacus. Abacuses or abaci were in use for a couple thousand years before this one in as far-flung places as China and India. This is the Roman version, and I like this one because it has a series of, it goes from 1s to 10s to 50s to 100s, all the way up to 1,000,000 in the far left. And then the numbers above represent 5s. So it really is an incredibly powerful tool to store numbers as high as 1,000,000, just 1,000 years ago. And another reason I chose the Roman abacus is because they used pebbles, or they called the little tokens there pebbles. And the Latin word for pebble is calculi, which is the root word for our modern word calculus. And across the Atlantic in South America, the Incan Empire had these intricate woven tools called quipus, and it's largely speculated that these were used to track granary storage. And it's a system of colors and knots and lengths of rope. And the idea here is that the empire would keep track of their far-flung villages by sending someone down, and they would record how much food was in the granary by tying knots at different places in these ropes. And so again, agriculture, data storage, computation, intricately connected. And then we fast forward. This is actually from still in South America, from Rio de Janeiro, the Portuguese Royal Reading Room in Brazil. And this was kind of the state of the art of data storage just 100, just a little less than 100, 200 years ago. And contains thousands of years of collected, recorded human history. So pretty impressive, visually stunning. And then we move forward to the 20th century and start to look at things that start to look a little bit more modern and more technology involved. So on the left we have a punch card, and the right we have an IBM mainframe that would and so the punch card was the data storage mechanism, and the mainframe did the calculations. And then again, starting to look a little bit more familiar, you got the floppy disks and the first Macintosh. And pretty much for the last 20, 30 years or so, some combination of Excel and a PC have been the way most data has been crunched. And Excel is great, and I know it's a very common tool on pretty much any business, including the farm. And it's really good for tracking hundreds, thousands, sometimes up to 10,000. But if anybody's tried to kind of import more than 50 or 100,000 rows or done complicated calculations on top of that, you're probably familiar with this error. So we're starting to come to the limits of what we can do with these things that are kind of physically, in our control here. And so this is kind of where we are today, and it's the cloud. And so you can have effectively infinite storage of the data, infinite access to machines through the cloud, which allows us to compute basically at scale. And that's really kind of the world in which the FBN data science team lives. So we've talked about statistics, we've talked about computer science and big data, and now we're going to talk a little bit about domain expertise. And you could have the smartest mathematicians and computer engineers in the world working on something, but if they don't really understand the business or the domain, or they're not communicating in a way that's intelligible or impactful, or they're not asking the right questions of the data, there's real limit to the value that it creates. And so one of the things we really focus on at FBN is finding practical value out of the data science that the team does. And it's reflected in the team's background. So a ton of ag experience on our data science team. So it's about asking the right questions. It's about communicating the findings in a way that's really useful. And there's a long history as well. We've got Sir John Laws and the Rothamsted Experimental Station. He was an entrepreneur that was really interested in fertilizer. And he had invested in a couple of trips to harvest bat guano in South America, and was trying to come up with an industrial process to develop fertilizer in the kind of mid-1800s. And he founded the Rothamsted Experimental Station, and it's the longest ongoing agricultural experiment, and there's still experiments going on there today. So he had decades and decades of results of how different fertilizer treatments worked on different crops, different blends of bone meal, fish oil, all sorts of things. It was really the foundation for the longitudinal agricultural experiment. And then in his successor of his, Ronald Fisher, kind of known as the father of modern statistics, actually continued to work at that very same experimental station. He was focused a little bit more on bioinformatics and evolution and kind of plant breeding, but very much in the same vein. And he created many of the foundational tools of kind of modern statistics, including things like the p-value, popularized the p-value, and other things. So again, just trying to highlight how deeply connected agriculture and and kind of the history of data science are. And so let's bring these three things together and really talk about what do we do at FBN and how do we kind of bring it back to create value for our network. And so, as you kind of heard this morning, we have close to 120 million acres across our member base in the US, Australia, and Canada. And that makes for a pretty wise crowd. And what do we do with that data? So I'm going to talk through a couple of the products that the team has produced, and also some of the things we do internally to help optimize FBN as a business. So we use the data that's contributed to us by the network to create tailored reports for folks who contribute data. So here's an example, and so the font's probably a little too small for everyone to see here, but this kind of comes out after harvest and after kind of harvest data is uploaded, and it's a tailored report showing how each of the seeds planted on your operation has fared, both from a yield and a net revenue perspective. And so here we have some F2F genetics head-to-head with P9998 and some Legend product. And yield, in this case, F2F didn't quite do as well as Pioneer P9988, but from a cost perspective and net revenue perspective, it was actually pretty much identical. We also provide access to our Seed Finder tool. And as I mentioned earlier, Seed Finder is likely the largest library of seed performance data across dozens and dozens of hundreds of brands, hundreds and hundreds of varietals and hybrids, more than a dozen crops. And you can slice that data by row spacing, nitrogen application, soil type, relative maturity, trait package, irrigation practices, et cetera, and really try to find results that kind of are representative of where you farm or where you intend to farm, and try to find the right product for you and your operation. Along with yield performance, we also have data on pricing, and so we take members' seed invoices that they choose to share with us and aggregate that as well. And so you could see, through this histogram, what the average price was paid, the median price for a bag of this particular hybrid was, or varietal in this case, as well as the range that people are paying. And with something like price, which changes every year and often typically goes up every year, and also with some of the big seed codes that do regional pricing, we give you the opportunity to filter by year and by state. So you're getting actually relevant results to the kind of year in which you're trying to buy and the region in which you're located. We also do farmer polls, and this is kind of in addition to our data capture. And the farmer polls are neat because we can respond to what's happening out there in the macroeconomic environment or that agronomic environment at a given moment. Obviously this fall, fertilizer prices have been through the roof, kind of historic levels. And so we created a quick FBN poll on various fertilizer prices. We got about 1,000 responses, and here we're seeing, for people who purchase anhydrous, about 550 or so. But it's a really powerful tool because we're able to ask a question that's really relevant, what's happening right now, and we can typically get results back to the network and the respondents who participated in the poll within a week or so. And we're actually going to start doing more of this polling on FBN Community, which gives us even more access to kind of turn it around really quickly. And so these results go back only to the people who participated in the poll. At least they see it first, and then in some cases we'll make it available to the broader network. And so those are some of the more public-facing, some of the tools that have been around for a while. I also want to talk about a couple of the more recent developments from the data science team. So this here is a product we've only just launched a couple, I gotta say, like 3 to 4 weeks ago. And it's our PRF optimizer, and it's a tool for crop insurance agents and their customers to help choose the right crop insurance policy. This particular version focuses on pasture, rangeland, and forage, and it's a very complicated crop insurance policy. I actually used to work for a crop insurance startup called the Climate Corporation, and I talked to a lot of farmers about how they chose crop insurance, and I often hear, not always, but a very common response was, I choose the policy kind of based on, the agent says, 85% or so of the growers in this area choose this one, and so that's typically what I go with. And a lot of people are more sophisticated than that, but it's a really complicated system, and there are hundreds of variables that go into figuring out your risk premiums and your indemnities and the historical weather in your area, and so it's not a straightforward calculation to make, and even the best crop insurance agents and the most sophisticated farmer customers don't have time to analyze all the different permutations there. And so this is really where data science excels. And so in the case of this particular policy optimizer, we've imported 50 years of historical weather data for every cropland unit in the country, and built out this scenario analyzer that very simply says, hey farmer, are you looking for a low risk policy? You want to maximize your possible indemnity? Do you want to minimize your premium payment? You want to be somewhere in the middle? And once you set the strategy, this spits out a lot of possible, a lot of possible policies, and helps you identify the policies that's the right fit for your kind of risk strategy. And what's really exciting about this is over time we'll be able to say, let's say you want to see how would this policy have fared 2 years ago when it was really dry in my region. It gives you much more practical understanding of what kind of indemnity should I expect if I'm going to get another kind of terrible drought year like a couple years ago. It really makes it much more accessible to make the right decision for you and your operation. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, I encourage you to go talk to the crop insurance table downstairs. They're certainly excited about it. This is a tool that you may have heard about yesterday in a talk, and my colleague, Dr. Graham Jeffries, who's over here helping out with the show today, gave a great talk yesterday about this, and he and his team have been building out an appraisal tool, so basically a farmland valuation tool. And originally, we kind of envisioned this as something that would help our lending team, our land loan team, be more efficient in their operations. We pride ourselves in a simple, kind of no-hassle land loan process, but there is an inevitable bottleneck of finding an appraiser. There's a limited number of appraisers, and there's sometimes up to 2 months bottleneck to get an appraisal done on a property. So we started investing in capabilities, ingesting millions of data on millions of farmland transactions to better understand what the comparables were selling for, comparable land was selling for. We were able to classify the land by productivity index and other indices that we derive from satellite imagery. And we were able to kind of back into the farm economics based on the productivity, the kind of historic productivity of a particular county, and built a really useful tool for our internal underwriting team. And it was so useful that we said, hey, if this is working so well for our own internal team, our mission here is farmers first. Why are we not making this also available to farmers? And so Graham's working really closely with our product manager, Jareen, who you can meet down at the FBN Digital booth, on kind of packaging this model and creating a version of this available for FBN members who are either looking to buy or sell or price or refinance their land. And I think it's just a great example of how something we built internally is now something we're excited to share with our network. And so feel free to ask, we got an expert in the room on this model and our product manager downstairs, so if there are questions, I'd certainly invite them. Another thing that doesn't always get a lot of kind of front row attention in the data science side is how our data scientists work with our logistics team to build out our proprietary logistics network. And in fact, we've got Jay in the back is responsible for a lot of this work. But what we're looking at here is a map of all of FBN's North American warehouse locations. We had this unique opportunity to effectively build a warehouse network from scratch. And so we've been asking ourselves the question, well, how can we serve the most farmers as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible? And so we used data science models to determine the optimal placement of every warehouse relative to the location of our member network and kind of where the network might grow. And so this is an example of how kind of internal optimization has helped us keep our freight costs down and allow us to kind of hit our delivery promises as much as possible. And so it's another thing that really differentiates the way that we run the business, is that the data science isn't just a product for the farmers, but it's really something that we use internally to make every part of our business that much more efficient and enable us to deliver more value at a lower cost. And so those, just to explain this a little bit more, those gray dots are member farm locations, and then the kind of green pins are the locations of our warehouses, and then the colored circles are effectively the radius around which that those warehouses serve. And those are, I think, 250-mile radiuses for the most part. Another thing kind of behind the scenes, you'd be surprised at how many products in our shop start with the letters GLY that aren't glyphosate. And so, traditional search, you might just type in GLY and you get an alphabetical list of the products. And glyphosate's, this is our current version, but glyphosate wasn't showing up in the top 10. And that was kind of a problem because it was a big driver for a lot of shop traffic. And so this is another thing, that, the type of use case that data scientists work on. And so Jay was also working on this one. He said, all right, well, how do we develop a model that surfaces the most relevant results for every combination of letters that's entered into that search bar? And so through optimization, through looking at results and what people click on, we've really refined that search model and have much more relevant results showing up. And that's also the type of thing that powers the other products you might be interested in on the FBN Shop carousel. And then we have our yield forecast, and this is, and Charles showcased this a little bit this morning, but this is an example of a model that takes data from a lot of different sources, from polls to farmer-contributed data to satellite imagery and derived layers from satellites, and develops our yield forecast. And I also adore this particular slide because it compares FBN's yield forecast model this year with that of the USDA. And you'll notice a couple things here. Number one, FBN's making adjustments on almost a weekly basis. And number two, the USDA tends to lag our estimates by about a month, and we have consistently outperformed the USDA forecasts, and we believe that, and so we're running this every week, providing it to farmers in their FBN account, and we're going to be right now we're doing it for 9 states with 2 crops, corn and beans, and we're going to be expanding it to more counties and more crop types over the next year. We really want this to be the type of tool that farmers can use to kind of stay ahead of the curve, stay ahead of the market. Now, we've talked a lot about the value that the business gets and that we provide back to the member network from the data that's shared with us. But I think it's really important to talk about our philosophy on data security and data privacy. First and foremost, we are legally bound by our terms of service and privacy policies. Never to sell your data to a third party, never to share data with a third party without your express permission. And we take that kind of legal commitment really seriously. But even more importantly, we think about our kind of genuine value proposition to you all. And part of that value proposition is we are great custodians of your information. It is your information at the end of the day. And we go to great lengths. So my team's responsible for analyzing this data, for storing this data, for moving it around in a lot of cases. And even within the team, we don't just provide access and permission to all those folders to everybody on the team. We have to have very concrete use cases and guidance, and oftentimes we go through efforts to scrape the identifying information from the data to ensure that it stays as private as possible internally. The other thing I'll say is we do have minimum data thresholds. So in the example of, let's say you're farming in a county where there's only 1 or 2 other FBN members, maybe it's a big county, so you could be, we will not include that data in our network responses. We have to have a minimum threshold of data density in order for that data to be allowed to be shared out with the network to anonymize it and aggregate it effectively. And then this is a little bit of a technical anecdote, but I like to share it because I think it shows the length to which we go through to kind of keep the data anonymous and safe. You'll see in some marketing materials the member map. So it's a map of North America, Australia, with pinpoints where every farm location is. There's actually software that can take that image and reverse engineer the latitude and longitude of each one of those pins. So somebody who's interested in, they could kind of figure out the lat long of every field in the network, and we don't want that. That's not our commitment to you. And so even our marketing materials, we take the extra step of running a little algorithm that introduces some randomness, so it slightly jitters the location of those pins a little slightly, just so they can never be reverse engineered and really protect anonymity. So it's kind of a technical detour there, but I think it's just indicative of the seriousness with which we take member data privacy and security. And on that note, we do have a couple folks downstairs from the data operations team at the FBN Digital booth. They're there to help you upload your data to your FBN account. We've got several different ways to do so. You could upload your field boundaries. We have, you can take a picture of your seed tags, your seed invoices. You could connect to My John Deere or case integration if you have that. And they're down there happy to help. And if you do choose to share your data during F2F, Farmer to Farmer, we have 25 FBN bucks to share with you. So it's not the 5,000 you get for spending $1 million with Direct, but it's a lot for us. So come on down and talk to the team. All right, so you all had a chance, hopefully, to guess my weight in our Wisdom of the Crowd poll. And drum roll, please. We're going to unveil the results here shortly. We did bring a scale. I brought a scale with me on the plane and measured myself without my boots on just before the presentation. So we've got a very accurate reading. So Jay, over to you. All right. So what we're looking at here is, let's see here. Oops, there we go. So these are all the results that were entered in the poll. All right, and so here we see the distribution of weight guesses. So all the way down to about 155 up to 165. So pretty broad, thanks guys, distribution. Turns out I weighed in at about 213 and a half pounds a little bit earlier today. Average guess was 198. So, you know, decently wise crowd. I did ask my wife, I texted her right before the presentation. I said, hey, Emily, what do you think I weigh? And I didn't give her any context. So she texted back, 218. So she was the expert on my weight, and you know, clearly didn't get it very right. So you know, it's good. It's always good to consult the data. It's always good to take measurements, and you don't always have to trust the experts. And just to finish this off, I thought I'd share this. This is you know, y'all know how to kind of interpret data in Excel, I imagine, but this is the code that Jay wrote to create that live reading of the chart here. So it kind of brings it all back home to the computer science, the domain and the statistics to power that chart we just saw. And you know, this is a reminder that, you know, at the end of the day, our team works for you guys, and we love hearing from you about new ways that we could use data to help you make more informed decisions, and would love to hear ideas either, you know, after this talk or down at the FBN Digital booth. But we're always looking for more and more interesting and better and more simple in some cases and useful ways to present the data that's shared with us. And so please don't be shy about sharing your ideas, and because we're here to help you. And so we'll have a little bit of a Q&A now if there are any questions, and so maybe we'll reserve, I think we got about 10 minutes for Q&A. And please do speak into the microphone.
Thank you for the presentation. That was really neat. So question or maybe idea, but in Seed Finder, would it be possible to, instead of only showing, okay, these are different seeding rates and yields for that rate, planting date, planting speed, harvest date, et cetera, could there be a summary page of this is the economic optimum for all these different metrics?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. I think, you know, one of the dangers of Seed Finder today is that we do have so many different axes along which you can split and splice the data that it's pretty easy to get to split down overly complicate it. And so to get to a point where, you know, you're looking at this particular RM range and this organic matter range and this state and all of us in this year, and all of a sudden there's just too few data points to actually be able to reliably, you know, provide good estimates. But I think, you know, with that as a caveat, yeah, that's absolutely something we could consider. We do have our seed performance tool, which kind of attempts to identify the kind of optimal hybrids or varietals for your particular field based on the conditions and the data that's in Seed Finder. But that's a little bit kind of less hands-on. That's more like you kind of, you know, plug and play. But yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's something we could look more into.
One more, if I could.
Sure.
So the seed performance tool, does that include a recommendation of planting date or seeding rate for your area?
We don't currently recommend seeding rate, not today. But what you could do is, once you look at the hybrids that are recommended by the performance tool, you could plug those into Seed Finder and for your state and see kind of what were the ideal, you know, what was the range of yield results for those populations. So you can do that actually manually, but not all within the performance tool. All right, any other questions?
Thank you. I've heard AI mentioned a couple times today already, and I'm wondering how are you currently using AI or contemplating using it? And from my experience with computer modeling, there's usually assumptions made by the creator that affect bias or whatever. Is that something we have to look at with AI too?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing I'll say, I think AI is often a very loosely used term, and sometimes some just kind of basic statistical models will be called AI in a good pitch presentation or something like that to make it sound more sophisticated than it really is. But I can say, kind of in the case of our team, we do make use of a variety of kind of machine learning techniques and other kind of more sophisticated computer models. For example, the optimization of the logistical network is a really hard math problem, and so the team does use some more kind of AI, probably AI adjacent type models to determine that. To your question about bias, I think that's a really good one. It's one I know Graham thinks a lot about, working on some of our FBN finance tools. As lenders, there are very strict requirements in terms of what data you can and can't use to underwrite a loan, for example, and so that's kind of there's already kind of some proactive regulation that ensure that you're not taking things like race or gender or disability as kind of a factor there. So those are things that we are kind of actively trying to steer clear from. Just speaking from my wife's experience, she works in the financial technology business, and they had a tool at her previous company that basically made loans, small loans to people in the developing world, and their underwriting model is actually based on the content of text messaging, which would be highly illegal in the United States. And it was finding that people who said thank you more often were better repayers of loans. It found people who called their moms, because it also had their call logs, who called people named Mother in their contact list, repaid more often than people who didn't. But it got a little scary too, because it started to select for people that spoke Kikuyu rather than Luo, so a local language that was with a more educated group of people than the other, and so that started to introduce this ethnicity bias in this company's underwriting model. So that gets really scary, and because it was a kind of artificial intelligence machine learning model, black box, it took them a while to discover that was going on, and that's very problematic, and certainly wouldn't be something that we would ever be able to or want to do here in the States. So bias is something, particularly now that we have this this chatbot writing my presentation introduction, something we've got to take very seriously. Sure, we got time for one more.
Hey, Kit. A lot of farmers typically get approached with a new product, a new gimmick, a new way of doing things, and more often than not I see do a check and a treat. Is there a better way to get good, statistically relevant, significant data out of doing different than check and treat?
Well, this is operationally complicated to do well, but I've always been partial to split planners, and not everybody has the right equipment set up to be able to do that. But I think that's one particularly powerful tool, because you can really control for everything but the genetics if you've got a split planner. And I think there are also some really interesting tools, and some of which the team has developed here at FBN on designing optimal plot design. And so how do you design the perfect trial, and considering the soil types and historic yield variation in a field, and those become quite complex, but are a great way to design very kind of rigorous treatments. And there's a couple other companies out there as well that have been kind of focused on machine learning based trial design, but that's kind of one that pops into mind. But I would encourage you to chat with some of the data scientists after this as well. I'd be happy to introduce you, and they might have some other ideas there as well. All right, well, that concludes the talk on data science and agriculture. We'll be around right out in the lobby or down at the FBN digital booth, so come on, say hi, come on, share your data if you're interested, and thanks so much for your time today.